I'm joined now by Labour's Shadow Defence Secretary, John Healey, joining us from Rotherham. Good morning to you, Mr Healey. And it seems like Labour is in lockstep with the Conservatives on its position regarding Ukraine.
That's right. I mean, the UK is united for Ukraine, and I'm proud Labour has stood with Ukraine since day one. And as Keir Starmer has said today, no matter which party is in power in this country, Britain will always back Ukraine, and we have to stand with them for as long as it takes for Ukraine to win.
Can I ask, whoever is in power in Britain supports Ukraine, but how much of an impact does that really have when the US is reluctant to spend more money on the situation?
The US leadership has been critical in the last 2 years, and the US supplies to support Ukraine have also been critical, which is why we all, alongside Ukraine, want the US Congress to unblock the bipartisan support that is there for this package of Ukraine support from America. It's critical, but every Western nation, every freedom-loving country needs to step up the support that we're prepared to give during this third year of fighting Ukraine faces. Because make no mistake, despite the huge courage with which Ukraine has fought and the huge damage in which it's inflicted on the Russian army, Russia is far from a spent force. And if it wins in Ukraine, it won't stop at Ukraine.
Well, you're right. It really isn't a spent force. It seems like that Russia is once again on the offensive. You're talking about other countries stepping up. The UK is one of the few that commits more than 2% of GDP to defence, as per the stipulations of NATO membership. But what about the others who don't? Can we be pointing the finger at them for not spending enough on defence, not giving enough to Ukraine?
Yes, we can. And by the end of this year, the majority of NATO nations will be spending at least to that 2% level. It's a minimum, not a maximum. And we have to face the fact that we have a war in Europe. Russian aggression is not confined to the battlefield in Ukraine. And with the American concerns about security in the Indo-Pacific, it's clear the European nations in NATO need to do more of the heavy lifting. And if we got a Labour government, I've been clear, and Keir Starmer's been clear, our first duty and our first priority will be to fulfil the UK's obligations to NATO in full, which we've not been doing.
It's come down in percentage terms, but still a huge net contributor. And your opposite number, Grant Shapps, would like 3% of GDP committed to defence. Is that something Labour would match should it form the next government?
But, you know, in the last year, the last Labour government in 2010, we were spending in this country 2.5% of GDP on defence. That's a level that the 14 following Conservative years not got close to matching. And whatever Grant Shapps says, there's no plan or timetable to increase defence spending from the Conservatives. From a Labour point of view, we will always spend what's required to defend the country, and what's required depends on a hard assessment of the threats we face, the capabilities we've got, the costs of the programmes that we have in place. And that's why we'll do a full strategic defence review in the first year of a Labour government if we win the election.
OK, and if that strategic defence review suggests more is spent on it, where are you going to find the money from?
Well, that'll be a matter for us to work through in government. It's very hard to make that judgment in opposition, simply because the critical information we need in defence and security is, of course, highly classified, and we don't get access to that.
Well, look, it may be classified, but we've all seen the reports about Trident tests this week not exactly going according to plan. And naysayers about Trident will say, look, it's past its best. People who are perhaps even in favour of the nuclear deterrent will wonder why things aren't working out as planned. And it would be easy to assume that needs more money spending on it as well. What's your view?
It may well do. It is, in the end, our ultimate security insurance. We maintain our UK independent deterrent both to protect the UK and on behalf of NATO allies, and our Labour commitment to the deterrent is total. The test fire failures was certainly a concern, but the Defence Secretary was able to reassure Parliament afterwards that it has no impact on the effectiveness of our continuous deterrent, which remains fully operational and formidable.
Let's just finish off by coming back to NATO, because, of course, later this year there is a US election, and more than likely it's going to be Donald Trump representing the Republicans. And he's made very clear what he thinks about NATO. You don't pay, you don't get the benefits of the US on your side. Is this all just playing into Vladimir Putin's hands? Because NATO, over the past 2 years, does not look like the force it may have considered to have been when the war started.
I'm sure that Putin is following very closely the sort of statements that are coming out of the US. But in the end, their election, just like ours, is not a foregone conclusion. If you're an elected politician, you take nothing for granted. What we do know, however, is that NATO has to do more, and the European countries need to do more within NATO in order to face the future decade of Russian aggression, not just in Ukraine, but beyond Ukraine.
And how can you affect positive change, as you might see it, of other countries, those ones who are not committing the 2% necessary? How can you persuade them to do that when we are living in more expensive times?
Well, I've been proud of the UK leadership on Ukraine over the last 2 years. The fact that we have moved first to supply helicopters, main battle tanks, long-range artillery systems has led others to follow suit. And the fact that we have been ready to commit the military aid support to Ukraine is part of the leadership that the UK needs to continue throughout this year and beyond.
John Healey joining us from Rotherham this morning. Many thanks indeed.